When understanding how to hear God's voice, we can look to Jesus' parable in John chapter 10, verse 2 through 5 to help us understand. Let's read. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. As we take a look at this verse, I want to talk about two things. The first is what the Hebrew word for hear is, and the second, distinguishing the voice of the stranger and connecting it to another parable of Jesus. Jesus says, the sheep hear the voice of the shepherd. The word hear in Hebrew is shema, and it's found in Deuteronomy 6:4, which reads, Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael. It's a central prayer in Judaism. It carries the essence of hearing and doing, or hearing and obeying. So when Jesus says, the sheep hear the voice of the shepherd, he's calling us to action. Hearing is not a passive thing. It should move one to action. And that's why James writes, don't be just hearers of the word, but doers of the word. When Jesus mentions the voice of the stranger, the Greek uses the word allotrios, which can also mean not part of the family. And this makes Jesus' statement in Matthew 12 really interesting. The disciples are asking Jesus to come outside because his brothers and mother are there to see him. And he asks a really interesting question. He says, who is my mother and brother? And then he answers his own question by saying, his mother, brother, and sister are those that do the will of the Father. And so what we see here is that Jesus is relating family with obedience and the will of God. And so we can see the voice of the stranger is one that's not part of the family. It's one that's leading you away from God's will. And this is actually how God told the Israelites to distinguish a false prophet in Deuteronomy chapter 13. Even if a false prophet, were to do signs and wonders, but lead you away from God and lead you away from keeping the commands of God, he was a stranger. He was considered a false prophet and a stranger. And this is what Jesus is saying in his parable in John chapter 10. The shepherd leads you into the will of the Father. The stranger, the one that's not part of the family, leads you away from God's will. And so that's how we can determine whether we're hearing God's voice or not, whether it leads us in his way and in his truth, or whether it leads us away from his will and breaking his commands. And Paul encourages us in Romans 12:2 when he writes, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And again, in 1 Corinthians 2:16, he writes, we have the mind of Messiah. So when it comes to hearing, to shema, it's the process of focusing on the shepherd and the renewing of our mind and the training of our ears. It becomes less about mystery and more with alignment of the will of God in one's life. If this teaching blessed you, consider subscribing and check out my most recent teaching on how we look at Moses' life as a blueprint for understanding the will of God. Thank you for watching this far. Be blessed.